Now, when it comes to building out the tables or the database schema, SQL Alchemy has a little bit of a limitation, and that is that SQL Alchemy doesn't allow us to modify tables. It doesn't allow us to create extra columns, delete columns, add foreign key constraints. And that's because when we define these models, what SQL Alchemy does is it checks to see if the specific table name already exists in our Postgres database. And if it does, it's not going to touch it. So if we make any changes, it will never push out those changes. It'll only create these tables if it doesn't already see a table with that specific name. And so we've had to resort to dropping all of our tables and then restarting our application so that SQL Alchemy builds it from scratch. And it's something we can't obviously do in production. That would be an unacceptable thing to do. And just to show you guys, in case you've forgotten, if we go to our Postgres database and we go, we can see that we've got our 3 tables. Now, if I add a phone number column to our user class, and I'll set this column to be just a string, and this is really just for demonstration purposes. You guys don't have to do this. If I save this and reload this, SQL Alchemy will not go into Postgres and actually create that column. If I refresh this and then go into users properties, you can see that it is not here. And so that's the limitation of SQL Alchemy. And so in this section, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at another tool that'll allow us to do a couple things. First of all, it's going to allow us to automatically update the columns based off of the models that we define here. So moving forward, when we add this phone number column, it's going to automatically update our Postgres database. And this tool is called Alembic. It is what we refer to as a database migration tool. However, it's much more powerful than that. Right? It's able to allow us to create incremental changes to our database and actually track it, kind of like we do with code. So in this lesson and in the next coming lessons, we're going to take a look at Alembic. We're going to see everything it has to offer. And I'm going to hopefully get you guys at least a solid understanding of how to work with Alembic so that when you guys work on your projects, you can immediately get Alembic installed, running, and then manage your databases using Alembic instead of having to either do it manually or use any other kind of unusual workaround. Now, one of the motivations for a database migration tool came from the fact that developers can track changes to their code and roll back their code easily with Git. And they wanted to be able to do the same thing for our database models and our database schema. And so they went about implementing what is referred to as database migration tools. And so a database migration tool just allows us to incrementally track changes to our schema and roll back those changes to any point in time. And so as we go through our project, we kept adding new tables and new features. What a database migration tool is, it's going to allow us to track those changes. And so if we ever want to go back to a specific point in time so that we can kind of troubleshoot code at that point in time, it's so easy. It's just one simple command and it's going to automatically update our database so that the schema matches what it was at that specific point in time. And so that tool that we're going to use, like I mentioned, is going to be Alembic. And what's great about Alembic is that it can also automatically pull all of our SQL Alchemy models and generate the proper tables based off of them. All right, so this is the documentation for Alembic. So it's just alembic.sql.com.org. And if you want to kind of follow along, just select the tutorial right here. And this is just going to give you kind of a quick walkthrough of how to get Alembic set up. But I'm going to show you guys this so you don't actually have to follow the tutorial. So we're going to do first of all, we have to install the library. So we'll do pip install Alembic. And so that'll get Alembic installed. And what it does is it actually gives us access to the Alembic command. So if I do alembic --help, and actually before we proceed any further, I want you to go ahead and delete phone number. We don't actually need that anymore. And then go to your application and actually close that out. Stop it so that it doesn't automatically restart for any other reason. And then also what we're going to do is I'm actually going to delete all of our tables so that we can actually take a look at how this works. So do delete drop. And if you try to drop this table, it's going to say we can't drop it due to the foreign key constraint. That's okay. We could just do drop cascade and that's going to delete it. And we're just going to do that for all of them. All right, so now let's get back to Alembic. I'm going to make this bigger for you guys. All right. And so we'll do alembic --help to see what commands we have. And the first thing that we have to do is we have to initialize Alembic. And what that's going to do is it's going to actually create an Alembic directory for us. So we'll do alembic init. And then I'm just going to do a dash help to see if we need to pass in any extra flags. And then we have to give it a directory name. So when we run this command, it's going to create a directory. I'm going to name the directory Alembic. You could call it DB, database, whatever you want to call it, but I'm just going to call it Alembic. So it's going to create a folder called Alembic. And so you can see that we've got this folder called Alembic, and notice how it gets installed outside of the app folder, which is what we want. And it also created this alembic.ini file. So we'll take a look at both of those. And the first thing that we want to do is go up into Alembic, and there's really one main file. It's the env.py. So this is kind of like the King Kong configuration file. And there's going to be a couple of things that we have to add to this file to make sure that things work. Because Alembic works with SQL Alchemy and the models that you build with SQL Alchemy, we need to make sure that it has access to our base object right here. So we have to import this base object into the env.py file. So I'm going to just go right here, and we're going to say from, and what we're going to do is, how do we actually get to that database file, that base object? We have to go into app, and then we go into database, and then we'll import base. All right, and so this is kind of give us access to all of those SQL Alchemy models. And then for target underscore metadata, instead of saying none, what we want to do is we want to get base. So we're accessing, this should be a capital B. Actually, let's just double check that it's capitalized. Yep, it's capitalized here. So we'll go to base, and then we want to make sure we grab metadata. So that's all we have to do to rig this up to SQL Alchemy. The next thing that we have to do is if we go to alembic.ini, we have to pass in one value here, which is the SQL Alchemy URL, which is basically what's the URL to access our Postgres database. And so just to show you what this is going to look like, this is going to be fundamentally no different than the URL that we used within database.py, which is this one right here. And so I'm just going to write this out. Just going to copy this first part right here because I can never remember that. And so here, just going to copy that. So we say PostgreSQL, and optionally with the URL, you can do a plus and then whatever driver you're using. So if you don't provide the driver, it's going to use whatever the default driver is. But we're using, let's see, which driver, what is our driver? If I do pip freeze, it's going to be this one right here. So this is the default driver for Postgres. So you don't actually need to provide it. But if you did, you could just say plus PSY COPG2. But like I said, it's the default one, so it's optional. Right? Then we have to give it the username. So what's the username that's going to be using to log into your Postgres database? For me, it's just Postgres. The password is going to be password123. It's going to be running on localhost. And then if you want to, you can provide the port, which is 5432, and then your database name, which is Fast API for me. So this is ultimately what the URL is going to look like. And at this point, Alembic is set up and ready to run. However, just like we did before, I don't like the fact that we're hard coding this data in here. It's gross. We're saving our password. And if we move into our production server, it's not going to work properly because they're not going to use these credentials or this IP. So instead of doing this, what we're actually going to do is we're going to override this value that's stored in this file within the env.py file. And so under this config right here, I'm going to set a new option under the config object. I'm going to say config.set underscore main underscore option. And then here we can override any options that we have in here. So I'm going to override this SQL Alchemy URL. So no matter what I put in here, we're actually going to override it. And here you just pass in a string. So SQL Alchemy.url. So that's the value we're going to override. And then we're going to pass in our string. So I can just cut this out, and it's okay to just leave this blank here. All right. And so we've hard-coded the string here, so we haven't technically fixed anything, but what we're going to do is, just like we have in our database.py file, you can see that we're using the settings object, right? That comes from our config file, which is making use of this Pydantic class, where we can grab it from our environment variable. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do the same exact thing we did with main, right? We imported settings, and we're just going to do that in our env.py file so we can access all of our environment variables. So I'm going to say from app.config import settings. And so now I have access to the settings object. I can override all of these. So this is going to be the username. So I can say settings.username. And actually, I don't think that's what it is. It's database_username. And then we'll override the password, which is settings.database_password. And in reality, instead of just typing this all out myself, we actually have this written out in our database.py file. So I can just copy this here. And that way we don't waste too much time. Okay, so we've got our URL set and we're not hard coding any values. And at this point, Alembic should be set to actually connect to our database and modify any of the tables, generate tables, and be able to really perform any actions that we wanted to moving forward. Hey guys, I made one tiny little mistake. If you take a look at where we're importing base, I wrote app.database. And if we take a look at that, it looks like we are grabbing our base right here, but this is not the one we want. Instead, what we want to do is we want to import it from models. So we want to import base, which is technically getting imported from that same file. But by doing it from here, it'll allow Alembic to read all of these models. And if we do it directly from database, it's not going to work. So what I want you guys to do is go to your env.py file and just change this from app.database to app.models. And that should fix any potential issues that you could have. Okay, so just to quickly recap, we have cleared out all of our tables, so there's nothing in our Postgres database. We don't have any tables defined, and we're going to do this all through Alembic. But what I want to do is I want to kind of go through this like we would have if we had already known about Alembic from the start of our project. And so we're going to take this step by step, right? Because when we first started creating tables in our Postgres database, we kind of went along with what we were working on in our app. So the first thing we did was we created a post table. And that's because we didn't learn about how to actually create users. We didn't learn about hashing passwords. We haven't gotten to the user section. So we originally just had a post table with a couple of fields. And then after working through our code, once we finished all the CRUD operations for posts, we then learned how to register users. And at that point, we had to create a table for users. And then after that, the next logical step was, hey, how do we set up the relationship between posts and users? Then we had to modify that and set up a foreign key. And then finally, after that, the last thing that we had to do was we created a voting table or a votes table, and then we set up all of the necessary foreign keys for that. So we're gonna do this step by step, just kind of like how we did it with our project. But we're gonna do this with the database so that you can see how we would have done it if we had already known how to work with Alembic. All right. So first things first, do Alembic --help, just to see what commands we have. And so there's a few different commands, but the first one that I want to focus on is revision. So when we want to make a change to our database, we create a revision. So the revision is what really tracks all of the changes that we make on a step-by-step basis. So we're going to do Alembic revision --help. And we'll see the different options that we have in our disposal. The first one is that really the only one that I care about is the -m flag. So it's kind of like when you do a git commit, you can add a -m, a message, so that you can kind of have a human readable name associated with each revision. So I'm going to say Alembic revision -m, and I'm going to say this is going to be create post table. So this revision is going to be responsible for creating a post table. We'll run that. And I want you to notice something, right? You can see that it created this file under the versions. So the versions folder under the Alembic folder is going to contain all of our changes. And if we take a look at the revision, there's a couple of things to note. So you'll see that we import OP from the Alembic library, and then we import SA from the SQL Alchemy library. And then you can see the revision ID that it gives it. And then there's going to be two different functions that are empty at the moment. So these functions are pretty important. What they are is the upgrade function. When we run the upgrade, what it does is it runs the commands for making the changes that you want to do. So in this case, we want to create a post table. So what we're going to do is we're going to put all of the logic for creating a post table within this function. And then if we ever want to roll back, right? If maybe I create the table and I realize I messed it up and I don't want it anymore, then we have to put in all of the logic in the downgrade function to handle removing the table. So the upgrade just handles the changes and the downgrade handles rolling it back, but it's all manual. You have to define how to do all of that. So let's go ahead and set up the upgrade function and let's configure all of the necessary columns for our post table. All right. And if you ever want to take a look at the documentation for this, what you want to do is select documentation here, and then you want to go down, 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 all the way down to API details, and then you want to go to DDL internals. So this is going to show you how to actually perform the various operations. So if you want to create a column, if you want to add a column, this is the command that you're going to run. If you want to alter a column, if you want to modify a table, drop a column, create a table, all of these are all listed here. So this is the sheet that you're going to reference on a fairly frequent basis when you're working with Alembic, because I can never remember each of the things. But we're going to go ahead and create our post table. And so we access the OP object from Alembic. I'm going to say OP. And then if you look at the documentation, the way to create a table is you do create _ table. And there's going to be a couple of properties we have to pass in. So what's the name of the table in Postgres? Well, we're going to call it posts. And then we have to define our columns. And I'm not going to do all of our post column because it's going to take a little bit of a while, and we might do it later on, but we're just going to define two columns. So the first one is going to be, well, first of all, we do SA column. So we're grabbing the SQL Alchemy object. And so this column is going to represent the ID. So the name of it's going to be ID. It's going to be type of integer. And I may have accidentally imported, nope, we're good. So integer. And then we can set nullable equals false, which means it's required. And then we also want this to be the primary key. So you just do primary key equals true. All right, fairly straightforward, right, guys? So we can then go in and create a second column. And so this is just going to follow the same exact pattern, sa.column. And then this one will be the title. It's going to be a type of sa.string. And this is going to be nullable equals false. And I'm just going to stop it right here. So we're going to just create two columns. I don't feel like creating all of the columns that we had for posts. And so the upgrade function is done. However, we also have to provide the logic for undoing these changes. So if we create a table, how do we undo that? Well, we delete the table. So we do op.drop _ table, and we just give it the name of the table. So it's going to be posts. All right. And so now we should be able to make these changes, and then we can roll back because we put the logic in for downgrading. So how exactly do we make these changes? Well, let's go to Alembic -- help. And let's see what commands we have. So we've got a couple branches. That's probably not it. Current, that's going to show us what's the current revision, like what version are we on. And if you actually want to see that, we'll see Alembic current. And it looks like it's giving me an error. Hold on. Let's go back to my env.py file. And I made a very silly mistake. This should be an F string, so it wasn't actually doing anything. That's why it was kind of highlighted weird. So let's try this now again. We're going to do Alembic current. And it's not going to actually really give us any useful information at the moment because we haven't run any migrations, right? We're kind of starting from a clean slate. So let's go back and let's just do a -- help and see what else we've got. So we've got a downgrade. Well, we don't want to downgrade. Edit, not really. Heads, we'll come back to that. History, that's not going to be useful because we haven't done anything. But if we go down, we want to get to upgrade. So this is what's important. So if we do Alembic upgrade, we could just do -- help and we'll see what options we have. And so we have to provide a revision number to tell Alembic like, hey, what version of our database do we want to go to? And so if you actually take a look at this specific revision, it provides a revision number. So if we actually want to get up to this point where it runs this upgrade, we provide this revision number. So I can say Alembic revision and then paste that. So let's run this and see what happens. Sorry, I didn't mean to type revision. I meant Alembic upgrade and then not Alembic revision. So that's going to upgrade it. And so you can see it did a couple things. It said running upgrade and it said it created post table. So let's go to Postgres and let's just refresh this and let's see if it actually did something. Right, and it looks like it created 2 tables, so that's interesting. So we see our post table, and let's just quickly inspect this. We'll go to columns. You can see that it created these columns, and this one got set to the primary key, and both are not null. So it looks like it did everything it was supposed to do. But what is this Alembic versions table? Well, this is what Alembic uses to kind of keep track of all of the revisions. And so if we just go to View, Edit, Data, All Rows, you can see that it just has one column at the moment, which has the revision number. You can see it's D18, and that's going to match up with this file, D18. So that's all that's doing. So it will create a table for you automatically so it can keep track of all of the revisions, but make sure you don't delete that. Okay, so that's cool. We just got our first table created through Alembic. And I think at this point, you probably still don't understand the brilliance of a database migration tool, and that's okay because we haven't really done much with it yet. So let's say that, as we're coding out our application, we realize we want to add a new column to our database. Specifically to our post table. Well, we can create a brand new revision to add a new column. So let's say, if you take a look at our models, we have a couple other fields that are missing. So let's say we want to add the content column now. I can type in Alembic revision. So this is going to create a brand new revision. We'll give it a name and I'll say add content column to post table. All right, and it's going to create a brand new revision for us. And once again, we have to put in the logic for upgrade and downgrading. And you can see that now that we have more than one revision, we can see that there's also a down revision. So if you want to go down a step, it's going to go to the revision of the previous one. So let's put it in the logic for creating or adding in a brand new column for content. And the way we add a new column is we do op.add_column. And then we specify the table we want to modify. So it's going to be the post table. And then we do sa.column to define this column. So what's the column name? It's going to be content. And it's going to be a type of string. And we're going to make sure that its nullable is set to false. All right. And remember, every time you set up the upgrade function, you have to set up the downgrade function. So if we add a column, how do we undo that? Well, we drop the column. So it's just op.drop_column. And then from the post, we have to provide the table that we want to drop the column from, which is the post table. And then we need to provide the actual column we want to drop, which is going to be content. So we'll do content. Okay, and so let's test this out. First of all, we'll run a few new commands. So Alembic. All right, and let's see what the current revision is. So if I do Alembic current, right, we could see that we are currently on 2D18. That's the revision. So this is the revision where we created the post table. And if I type in the Alembic heads, we can see that the latest revision is actually 298A5, which is that new one we just created. So if we ever want to get to the latest revision, that's what's referred to as the head. So I can say, if we want to, upgrade to that revision, I can say Alembic upgrade like we did before. And I can grab the revision number like this. Or because it also happens to be the head, I can just say Alembic upgrade head. And it's going to do the same thing. So let's try this. All right, it said it added a content column. We'll go and check this in Postgres. And I'm just going to refresh this table. And we'll go into properties. And we can see that we added the content. Now, let's say that after working on this for a bit, we realize we want to undo these changes for whatever reason. Maybe we no longer want the content column. So how do we actually roll back? Well, since upgrading makes the changes, downgrading is going to do the opposite. So we can do Alembic, downgrade. And then if you want to just roll back this revision, we can see what the down revision is. So we can just say this and just paste that in there. But we can also do a few other things. We can also say -1. So when I say -1, that means I'm going to go back to one revision earlier. And we can even go as far back as we want. So if I say I want to go back to -2, it's going to go back to 2 revisions earlier. But we just have 1, so I'm just going to say -1, or I can just paste in the revision number. And so if I run the downgrade, you can see that it ran this downgrade. And if I go and refresh this, and then go to properties, columns, we can see that we no longer have a content column. And that's how easy it is to downgrade or roll back your database using a database migration tool like Alembic. Okay, so we got our post table. We're not going to worry too much about that. The next part of our application was, hey, let's implement user functionality. Let's make it so that users can sign up and log in. So now we need to create a users table. How do we do that? Well, let's set up a new revision. We'll do Alembic revision -m, and I'll say add user table. All right, so we've got our brand new revision, and we have to set up the upgrade and the downgrade. Now for this, I don't want to just type this out, one by one. It would be kind of slow and boring for you guys. So I'm just going to copy and paste this from my notes. And if you want to follow along, just, pause the video and just write this out. But we'll just quickly, walk through exactly what's happening. So once again, we're using the create table method. We're going to create a table called users, and then we're going to set up all of our columns. So we've got a column called ID, which is an integer, set to nullable equals false. You notice how I haven't set this to be the primary key here? That's because there's 2 different ways to set the primary key. If we go back to the previous one, we set this to be primary key equals true. But on this one, if you actually go all the way down to the bottom, you can see that we can add in a constraint, SA primary key constraint, and then we pass the name of the column. That's going to be the primary key. So they both do the same thing. It's just whatever method you prefer. We've got the email column, which is going to be set to nullable equals false. Same thing with password. Then we've got the created at. And so here it's going to be of type timestamp. And you'll see that this is all coming from SQL Alchemy, essentially. Because if we go to our models and we go to our user table, it's the same thing. Type timestamp, time zone equals true, nullable equals false, server default equals text. Well, that's created at, but yeah. And we're just doing the same thing. So server default, and then we grab sa.text, now nullable equals false. And then you can see that we added a unique constraint under the email field to ensure that we can't have duplicate emails. And then to downgrade, we just do op.drop_table users. All right. And so once again, if you want to see where we currently are, because remember, we had originally upgraded, added the content column, but then we downgraded. So where exactly are we from a revision perspective? Well, let's do Alembic current. You can see that we're on 2D18. So we're back on that first revision. And we can also do an Alembic, I believe it's history. And you can see the history of our revision. So we created post, add content column to posts, and then add user table. And this is the head. So if you want to go all the way to the front to the latest, you would just do Alembic upgrade head. And I think there was one more I want to show you. Yeah, that's okay. So we're going to do an Alembic. And let's say that we just want to go and go up one revision. So adding one revision is going to add that column back. We can do Alembic upgrade. And we can either put in the name of this revision, or we can upgrade one level. If we want to go all the way to the latest, which is going to be adding the user table, we can say head. We can also go up 2 revisions. So if I do +2, that's going to go up to add content column 1. That's the first revision. And then one more, which is going to go up to the latest in this case. So there's a lot of different ways to get there. I'm just going to go to the latest. So this is